Hello and welcome to the PPN Southeast Psychology Expanded podcast, the podcast that gives NHS psychological professions a personal voice and offers an opportunity to hear about the experiences of people within these roles. We'll be looking at the intricacies and different areas of working as a psychological profession within the NHS. I'm Mel Ray, an assistant psychologist, and I'll be your host today. The PPN Southeast is a membership network for all psychological professionals and other people who are interested in NHS commissioned psychological healthcare. See our website link in the show notes below for more information on the PPN. In today's episode, we'll be talking to Neha Cattra. Neha is a counselling psychologist. We'll discuss how she got into counselling psychology and her career development into working strategically and academically. We'll talk about the counselling psychology doctorate course, how she's been able to use her position to influence training for other psychological professionals, how her culture and ethics keep her motivated, and what she wished she knew at the beginning of her journey. So there's loads to cover in today's episode, and it really is very interesting. So let's welcome Neha. So welcome, Neha. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. It's really exciting to speak to you. Let's just start from the top. Can you tell us what your job role is, how long you've been doing it? Give us a sort of a feel of what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So I'm a counselling psychologist. So I'm a chartered counselling psychologist and I have a number of different roles. In my NHS world, I'm a principal chartered counselling psychologist specialising in education and training. I also have a teaching role. I'm a lecturer on a DCLIN programme and I'm the CBT pathway lead on that DCLIN programme as well. I've been doing both of those roles for between 18 months and 2 years. So I did a big shift about 18 months, 2 years ago, out of a full-time clinical role in the NHS, in a secondary care adult mental health team in the community, basically. So I've always worked with adults clinically. I've always worked in secondary care. But my current roles are varied, and I also do a really small amount of independent practice as well within that time.
You've done sort of, I mean, that's a huge shift moving from clinical to sort of an academically charged space. I guess just picking up on a few things that you talked of. The DCLIN is the Doctorate in Clinical Psychology programme that trains clinical psychologists. CBT is cognitive behavioural therapy or therapists.
Yeah.
And secondary care.
Secondary care is probably still sort of that step up from, like your GP or talking therapies that used to be called IAPT. So secondary care is that next step up where people have more needs. And then inpatient is probably more tertiary kind of care.
So tell us how you got into counselling psychology. Give us an idea of sort of your route in.
Yeah, it really goes back to my choosing my A-levels, actually. And I often say to people I kind of fell into psychology. There was no grand plan. So when I chose my A-levels, I didn't actually choose psychology. I chose a different A-level. And I realised that the one I'd chosen really wasn't for me. And I could see all my friends, you get that 2-week period just at the beginning of your A-levels and you could swap if you really wanted to. And I could see that seemed just more captivating, more interesting, and tapped into something that I can't quite describe that I was interested in. And I'm really good at pestering when I want to, so I pestered the head of the course. And the reason I had to pester him is he said he was already oversubscribed for psychology, and quite frankly, he could do with people choosing to go somewhere else rather than carry on with psychology. But I pestered and I pestered and I pestered and I wore him down and he let me join this oversubscribed class. I really enjoyed it. I did great as part of it. Really, really thrived in it. And then I kind of got to that point where I was like, well, I've got to go to uni now. There wasn't really a question I'd be going to uni. And so I was like, well, what do? I suppose I really like this psychology thing. I'll do more of that. Excuse me. And so I did psychology as an undergraduate and found that absolutely amazing, so fascinating. Just the insight into how our minds work, how our brains work, how we interact with other people, that social element. I really enjoyed sort of social psychology more than anything. Abnormal psychology, which is kind of the way you think about people and their mental health. I really love those. They really spoke to me. And then I kind of got towards the end of my degree, and I was like, I just don't know what I want to do with this. I don't think being in an office, doing an office job is quite what I want, but I had an idea about what an office job would be. It just didn't seem to sort of interest me. I wanted to work with other people, in relation to other people. So I'd spoken to all of my lecturers who had different specialisms. And I said, well, this sounds like me. You know, we were talking about counselling psychology, you know, really solid foundational therapeutic training, thinking about working in healthcare potentially, thinking about people's distress in a way that is not pathologizing. Excuse me. And that really spoke to me. But my lecturer said, you know, if you've not really thought a lot about this already, why don't you do a taster course, right? Test it out. Do a taster course in counselling skills and see if that's how you want to work with people. So I did that for a year. Whilst I did that, I got some volunteering experience working with people who struggled with their mental health, and really enjoyed that. Really, I mean, it's hard to describe really, but just loved being alongside people and helping them, but not being this person that sort of parachutes in and does things for other people, but alongside them, helping them to figure out their own kind of things that they'd like to do, what would lead to a better quality of life. And I guess I can give these things words now, but I couldn't have perhaps named it in this way back then. But that's what I look back and I go, that's what I was trying to do. That's what I was learning to do. I had some really varied experiences. It was really interesting. I could talk for half a day on those varied experiences, but it was amazing to get the opportunity to work with a range of different people in the community, in volunteering centres, in schools. I worked with kids as well. You know, I had a really great time, and they made me go, yeah, this is what I want to do. And so I looked at counselling psychology as my options, because I suppose I was really taken in by its stance to distress and mental health. And I guess it also had some flexibility that it didn't have to just be with people with a severe and enduring mental illness, with low-level, distress. It could be a whole range of people, even people who were just questioning things about themselves and the world. You know, it allowed me that sort of scope. And I was particularly keen to learn different models of working with people, because and even then I kind of had a sense that one way of working isn't going to work. Like one thing would work for me, something else might work for someone else. And I didn't want to just do a single theoretical approach. So really, really captivated me. And so I applied to do counselling psychology. Didn't have great luck initially. Went and got more experience. Reflected a bit more about what I could do better as I'm sort of pursuing this. And I managed to get onto a course that really that particularly aligned itself to a relational way of working, which again just speaks to all those things that I find really important. And did my training, and my training, you know, the training is at least 3 years, lots of teaching, very sort of heavy on the philosophy, very heavy on the sort of questioning and querying evidence about mental health, and a really robust therapeutic training alongside, you know, doctoral level research, placement, huge outputs in terms of clinical assignments and things. A really magical experience. Hard, you know, having to kind of figure things out, and you know, it's not set up like other trainings can be. You have to kind of go out there and get your placements. You have to convince people in some ways to take you on and take a chance on you, and give you access to supervision, and you might have to pay for your own and all these other things. So it's really important to be willing to kind of put yourself out there in that way, I think, because you are having to figure it out. And there's not a better way of doing that versus another way of doing it, but it afforded me a lot of flexibility as well. Like I could choose to go and work in a charity if they'd have me. That interested me. And I'd get the skills and the opportunities to practice. I could choose to see if I could get an NHS placement with a specialist team, which I did eventually get, for example. So loads of flexibility and ways of understanding systems.
What a great way of building networks as well. You're not kind of just like, this is where you're going, and then you just rock up, right? Which, so what a great way of sort of networking all of the way, really having to sort of sell yourself and build those skills of being able to, interview skills, really, being able to sell yourself on a level. So it comes with that sort of additional practice, I guess, in relational working, because you have to be relatable for these people to take you, right?
Absolutely.
So that sounds really, really interesting. And I guess the training you're talking about is doctoral level training, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a doctorate. You come out with a doctorate sort of at the end, the same way as maybe a clinical psychologist does, or a health psychologist does, or educational psychologist does. The training of counselling psychologists is a doctorate level training, 3 years, but I don't think it would be controversial to say it does come with some barriers to people. It's a self-funded training course. You sometimes have to supply your own supervision, and from my understanding, but please correct me if I'm wrong, some of the placements you can attend don't always pay. So sometimes they're voluntary placements, not paid placements like other Deakin courses. But you get to come out and work in the same sphere as maybe a clinical psychologist does. You see a lot of roles now that are counselling/clinical psychologists where that wasn't always the case, right? So you get these pros and cons. And I guess I just wanted your take on the course. Like,
absolutely.
Would you do it again?
I would do it again. The hesitation isn't that I wouldn't do it again. I think I would do it a little bit later in my life, not significantly later. I was the youngest person on my course. And counselling psychology, because it has other things and barriers like funding, does introduce a degree of privilege in other ways. In my experience, and this is purely anecdotal, I have seen a broader range of ages, ethnicities, people from different countries and cultural backgrounds, so more wider European, other places as well as, did I say age? I've already said age. Huge range of age in, ranges in the courses as well. And if I was thinking about my cohort, there was almost sort of an even split between half of the cohort being under the age of 35 when we started training, and half being over the age of 35, 40, in fact. And some people were coming to it as their second and third career. People like me were coming to it as their first career. I was the youngest on my training. I don't think that's a bad thing, and actually it was a big part of my reflection in my interview that people might think I'm quite young, and this is like, how am I supposed to help certain people? But I reflected on that a lot during my interview and talked about, people don't know what I've experienced and what I bring to my training and to my practice. But I was young, if I look back at it now, and I probably wasn't quite as clear on what it would entail. A huge professional and personal journey that really taught me a lot about who I was, what was important to me, what I'd also perhaps not always given space to or considered. So really, really important. So yes, I would absolutely do it again. Absolutely. But did I always make the most of it? Because I was perhaps focused on other things. And that's what I would say. Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. And I think it's so refreshing to hear somebody talk about it in that way. Because I think we think, well, I was on the course. Of course I'd do it again. Like almost this sort of, I can't really sort of not find challenges or can't really reflect on it in a wholesome way because of the amount of thanks they have for actually getting to that place. So listening to someone and say, actually, I'm not sure I did make the most of it. I was at a young age and was going through a whole bunch of other things. I think is actually something that a lot of people can resonate with, and it feels really refreshing to hear that take. So thank you.
Can I
And I
add to
guess,
that as well? I was just going
yeah,
to
of
say as
course.
well, I think what's really interesting is this idea that there wasn't a plan, or that there isn't one way of doing it. You know, I had people on my course, as I say, had come to it as a second and third career, and they didn't see it as something that they must have done when they were 25 or something in order to make the, you know. And I think that can be a bit different in other courses where, you know, I look at my cohorts and a lot of them are people who've sort of mid-20s, late 20s. Not everyone, obviously, but they sort of start their training at that age, and that's nothing wrong with that. It's just recognising that perhaps there's a sense of urgency that might
Yeah.
perpetuate, which isn't necessarily needed. I
And
think
I
it's
guess,
really important to grapple with these things. I think that's what is really important, I think, is that they're not just kind of, this is the map and I'm following this route. You've kind of got to be able, you've got to be willing to kind of find yourself in the middle of the forest and have to figure your way back out. You know, so important. That's part
and
of
I think,
what you're going to be teaching your clients to learn how to do as well when they're struggling.
yeah, and as an aspiring psychologist of any of the psychology,
Mm.
divisions or sort of however you place them, I think there's always times where you find yourself in a space that makes you feel lost
Mm.
and unsure about what your next step's going to be. And really, I think keeping that in mind is going to be really helpful for people to know and hear from somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't feel maybe as lost as somebody in their same position. I guess in terms of the training that you did though, Neha, in terms of the counselling sort of doctorate, counselling psychologist doctorate, it sounds like a challenging environment. So I don't think anyone's surprised to say that it probably wasn't challenging. But what did it feel like in terms of sort of juggling that with life, juggling that with placements?
Yeah.
What did that kind of feel like when you were training?
You know, I was in a very different position to, well, not very, but I was in a different position to a lot of other people who may have also been pursuing the training, in that I didn't have other sort of major responsibilities. I wasn't tied down, didn't have family roots that, you know, that I was having to be responsible for. I was attached to my family of origin, certainly. Um, I was also sort of advised, certainly in my first year, I did continue working part-time. So I sort of managed to support a lot of what I was doing through that. But I had some help, and I'm very fortunate that I had that help. Not
Yeah.
everyone can, and other people have to work, and they have to think about their savings, and they have to think about their dependents as well. So I was very fortunate, and I don't gloss over that. I was really fortunate that I had the support of my parents to train in this way. They haven't always understood what it was, but they've totally understood that it was my interest and that's what I wanted to do. Um, yes, I've been very fortunate in that regard. I think one of the tricky things is thinking back to, again, getting that experience. You cannot finish your training until you have accrued 450 supervised clinical hours.
Goodness.
And that is not a small number of clinical hours. I remember at one point I was seeing 8 or 9 clients in 2 days. It was tough at times, it definitely was. And then, you know, going into teaching, having to have supervision, having to have personal therapy as well. And saying what you said earlier about, you know, placements, it was very rare for me to hear about paid placements. I didn't have any paid placements at all. I had a couple of friends who did. They were fortunate. They either worked somewhere that was willing to support them to do the training, or they worked somewhere that they could use as a placement. You know, it varies. It's a bit more common now that some placements will be paid. Some of the agencies I work for would say, well, look, we'll provide you supervision and some CPD, and that will be your payment, right?
Mm.
But you're clocking up the hours, and so yeah, 450 hours, and you've got to do it in sort of 3 years. It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
And what that can leave out, and maybe it's just my experience because I didn't have a huge amount of time in the NHS. I did a day a week for about 10 months in the NHS. What that leaves out is, because I have to clock up the hours, I can't join team meetings. I don't have a sense of working as part of an MDT. I don't have any awareness of a commissioning of services and why we do things the way we do. And I just go in and I see my patients. I have supervision. I write my notes and I leave. And so there were times that was happening as well. And that's tough as well. Other friends of mine, other colleagues of mine will have had a lot more NHS experience. Others have had none at all. And that's because counselling psychology isn't only rooted in the NHS, but from a values perspective, the NHS is incredibly important to me. So it was always something that I had my sights on. You know, my other roles afford me the opportunity to do work in this area, to think about other trainings and things. And so first of all, I should say that the Division of Counselling Psychology is only 30 years old, whereas we're training our 53rd cohort, for example, of clinical psychology trainees at the university I work at. So it's been around a lot longer. It's clinical psychology is bigger, it's older, it's far more established, and it came out originally of a different tradition. It came through a medical way of understanding mental health and distress. Counselling psychology has come out in response to that, thinking, hang on, that's not the only way to view these things. Now, that gap has closed a great deal over the years. It really has. Cannot stress that enough. There are far more similarities between the professions than there are differences now. And you said earlier, jobs now advertised to clinical and counselling psychologists, or even might say practitioner psychologists. And actually, the BPS would say that is better practice than only advertising to a clinical psychologist or a counselling psychologist, unless there are very specific reasons. Let's say, for example, I didn't do any training in neuropsychology or neuropsych testing. But that's my generation of counselling psychologists, and I understand that that's changing. So unless the job specifically requires that experience, and then you couldn't necessarily argue that a counselling psychologist doesn't have that, because they may have done postgraduate training. And I think that's really important to remember, is that no person, when they're qualified, is the same as they are 10 years post-qualifying. They've done a lot more things. They've had a lot more experiences. They've done more CPD. They may even have done loads more additional training. Like I've done a whole master's in CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, since qualifying, for example. And so it's remembering all those things. So the best practice is to advertise according to what the job entails and the competencies you require. And even then, you couldn't say that only X group can do that.
I mean, you're Superwoman. How you find time to do all of your job roles, plus a master's, and, live a life. You've got to be Superwoman, because I struggle and I'm not even doing a master's and I'm not qualified. So you've got to be Superwoman. I refuse to believe you're anything else.
I think just to add to the thing I haven't talked at all about, and just for information, one of the things that we might think about is the kinds of things I've been able to do. I've done a British Psychological Society level leadership program, which lasted 2.5 years, and I had projects at a BPS level that I was engaged in, and then with my Division of Counselling Psychology as well. I've been a member of the Division of Counselling Psychology and on the executive committee for a good 5 or 6 years until fairly recently, holding various roles, representing the profession nationally, involved in conference planning and organising, involved in communications as communications lead. All of the kind of support and governance for a profession in a non-regulatory way I have been involved in for several years. And that's part of that connection to that wider profession in a wider context of a group of different kinds of psychological professionals. That's how I've kept connected to those values.
I mean, and there's definitely something that I think we need to come on to in a minute. So just for the people that are listening that don't sort of know, BPS is the British Psychological Society, and it's an organisation that most psychologists, people aspiring to be psychologists, graduates, and everyone go through for connection, for support, for CPD, and for registration. You can find lists on there about people that work privately. So it's an all-encompassing place, and we'll put the link for that in the show notes below, just in case anyone wants to have a little look see around. But it is really interesting. Like you've done voluntary work before you got onto course. You've done so many placements on course. You've come out, you've worked in adult psychology, adult sort of mental health, and now you're doing the course. So, cheeky question, you don't have to answer it. You've done so much in so many different places. How do you stay connected to your core value? What's the thing that keeps you thinking, okay, I need to keep going, I need to keep learning, I need to keep, working, I want to make it better, I want to make it different, I want to do something different? What keeps you connected to that kind of part of you that does that?
I think what I've come to realise over the years, and I hope it's maybe something that people can take away from this as well, is there's no one way to do something. They're all interconnected, and they're just different ways of being involved at different levels, with the education and training of others, with the governance and support to the wider profession. All of those things are sort of what drives me. To answer your question about values, I place huge importance on a sense of duty. That might be somewhat cultural. I'm the eldest of 4 in an Indian family. I'm a second generation on one side and a first generation on the other, British citizen, and some of that might well come from that strong basis of being part of my family of origin. It's really important to me to help and support others. But to more than anything, and I use this analogy a lot, is I don't want to, the analogy of, give a person a fish and they can feed themselves and their family for a day. Teach that person how to fish and they can feed and support their community for a lifetime. And that is how I operate in the world. Right. So I no longer practice clinically in the NHS, and I thought that day would never come. I never saw myself not seeing patients in the NHS. My NHS role is strategic and supportive, and it's intended to increase access to the profession from an early stage, pre-registration, and to support people to get onto training and to go through training, through their placements in the NHS. And my role is not clinical in the NHS anymore. But through that work, I can bring more people to learn how to fish, as it were, so that they can go out and do those things, right? And I've learned more and more about using my experience and my knowledge and my networks. You said earlier, how much I've been able to build networks. I've been able to use that to kind of create a bigger impact. Yeah. And it's not to say that I'm not doing that on my own. It's not me doing it. I'm part of a system that's keen to develop that. I couldn't do it without my teams that I work with, but I've been able to do those things with their support, with new ideas about how we go about doing that. So for me, it's duty and in service to others, but to foster others to grow and develop as well. The key things that I think, have many people, if we're thinking about visible role models, I haven't had many visible role models in my experience, and I think it is really important that I am one. And so a lot of the work that I do in my trust is around increasing access to the profession. And I'm a visible role model, and that's part of what I bring. It's part of who I am. It's important to me. It's not tokenistic. And it's intended to take action where you say you will. And I think there's a tension for me with the CBT, the cognitive behavioural therapy stuff. It comes, like a lot of therapeutic models. So the cognitive behavioural work that I do at Surrey as part of my teaching role, obviously a lot of universities have different models that they use, and other providers prioritise other ones. There is a tension for me with a model that is so rooted and has historically been so rooted in a white Western perspective, and using that cross-culturally. There is a tension for me about how that works. And I think the thing I say to the trainees that I work with is, I'm always learning. They have to remember, I have to remind them, I had my training in that context. So the models I've been exposed to, the literature and the evidence I've been exposed to is exactly that. It's coming from that Eurocentric, white Western-centric perspective. And so no, I'm not as au fait with the development of literature as I perhaps could be, because I'm still learning, because that's how I've grown up, right? So absolutely, it's holding that in mind.
Yeah, I think this conversations like these that we're having and that we can put out into the world, really for me are showing how all of these psychological disciplines, sort of clinical counselling, forensic, health, education, all of these psychologists, actually we're all meeting in the middle, which we're all working towards meeting in the middle, which is actually accessibility, fairness, making sure that we're all focusing on making sure that the service that is given is right for the person that we're giving it to in a psychologically informed way. And for now, I've got one last question for you, and it is my favourite, and everyone knows it's my favourite, but I'm always going to say it is because it is. So looking back on your journey to where you are now, what's one thing that you wish you knew or that you wish you could tell yourself at the beginning of your journey?
Oh, that's tough, isn't it? Oh, I think that at various times I'm going to be thinking out loud with you now.
You think out loud.
Gosh, I think at various times where it has been hard, and I've looked around at other people getting on with their roles, their jobs, whether it's people who have trained through medicine to become psychiatrists and they've kind of had this path laid out for them that's been quite clear, or it's clinical psychologists who've had clear paths and things like that. Maybe it's not felt clear to get onto the course, I'm not saying that, but I've looked around and kind of thought, well, other people are doing it okay, maybe there's something wrong with me, or I'm not getting this right, or I'm taking way too long to do it. And I'll remember something that as part of my training, I've had to have personal therapy, and I remember getting to the end of my training with the same personal therapist I had for the whole duration. And the course is 3 years, but it took me longer to finish everything and get the hours and so on. And that's without, dependence and other things, gosh, it's hard going at times. I remember saying, I wish I'd done this sooner. Something's obviously I'm not good enough at this, I should have done this quicker. Why haven't I done? And I remember my therapist just saying to me, long pause, nice therapeutic silence. And she just went, would you have been ready? And I just went, and again, I really thought about what she was asking me. She, really thought about that question. I really thought about what I wanted to say, and I said, yeah, probably not, actually. I'm where I need to be. And remembering that, when it got hard and I was up at 3 a.m, and, at one point during my writing up my thesis, I inverted my days. I slept during the day and I worked at night because no one could ring me, no one could email me, no one could expect a response. When it got hard like that, or I didn't know where I was going to get another placement to get more hours, or I wish I'd known that.
So thank you so much for that. It's such an important thing to acknowledge, isn't it? Like, life happens when life happens, and there's nothing we're going to do to stop it happening when it's happening, right? So
exactly. And there are more things
thank
to
you.
life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and joining us, Neha. This has been fantastic, and I know that I've thrown you with all of my random questions, and it's not what we planned, but thank you for bearing with me. And like I said, we're definitely going to get you back on because I want to continue this. And just thank you.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
So that was Neha Cattra, a counselling psychologist, talking to us about her counselling training and all of the things that's encompassed and the reflections she's had about that. Absolutely fantastic. If you'd like, remember, if you want updates to PPN information or NHS updates, then you can become a member of the PPN South East by visiting the website. Again, those are in the show notes below. Registration and membership for the PPN is free. Thank you all for listening. We hope that you have a good couple of weeks, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.